All dialogue participants are speaking as individuals and are not officially representing the views of their respective church affiliations. Oftentimes, as a society, we are caught in intense and highly emotional differences. At times, they are framed as clash of values, which suggest that the outcome is a zero-sum in which only one side can exist and be accepted. This is exactly how the issue of same-sex marriage is being framed, as protesters for both sides took to the streets and courtrooms. The fabric of trust and civility that allows our society to thrive was being shredded before our eyes.
The really hard thing about this period of time was that I had friends and family on both sides of the issue, and they were kind, they were generous, they were wonderful people. But then when it came to this one issue, when they would start to talk about this issue, they would demonize people on the other side as liars or haters or bigots. And it was very painful. And I felt there's got to be a way that we can talk about this. And I thought we should be able to start with people of faith, people who believe in a God who commands us to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We should be able, if we have this common belief, we should be able to have a civil conversation. So why isn't this happening, and how can we create a space for it? It was a personal priority for me.
Perhaps one of the most challenging tasks was to get the buy-in from a small group of faith leaders on various sides of the issue to come together. This process took much time, dedication, and strong convictions. In the midst of the intensity of Prop 8 in 2010, a private and intimate dialogue was convened by the City of Los Angeles Human Relations Commission. 8 faith leaders from various denominations and sides of the issue came together. The premise of the dialogue is not to convert or change personal beliefs. Rather, it is to see the humanity in the other and how best to help congregations engage and cope. Both the City Human Relations Commission and the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy played a role in facilitating the dialogue.
I'm Randall Paul. I'm the president of the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy, and the foundation has been asked to consult with the City of Los Angeles on a very important dialogue over the religious foundations for people's position on Prop 8. The dialogue model that we use is called the Way of Openness. It's based on disclosure of your deepest motives as well as your deepest beliefs. We have found when we bring together face-to-face religious rivals who might see each other as enemies or suspicious opponents at best, when they engage and find that the other person's motive is indeed one that includes the best interest of the other party, everything changes. They begin to put their wall of suspicion down and start to talk in a real fashion about what matters most to them. And our goal, of course, is to create this new level of trust and even friendship. Can we actually be friends and adversaries at the same time? The answer is yes.
2 years later, several of the same faith leaders came together again as a point of reflection, and they look back on the impacts of the original dialogue effort in 2010.
I was here in 2010 for the first conversation, and I'm glad to be back and looking for even richer dialogue today.
I also was here a couple of years ago when we had this initial conversation. I'm very interested to see and to foster the idea that we can have a civil discussion on a rather controversial topic and remain friends.
This is my first dialogue on LGBT issues and on Prop 8, so I'm very excited to engage in conversation with all of you.
I was here 2 years ago for the conversation, and it had an impact on me that has been, in some ways, life-changing in the way that I perceive our interreligious work and the way in which we have dialogue. And so I'm glad to be back and really looking forward to the conversation today.
This is my first time. I heard a lot about the dialogue earlier and was anxious to come and meet all of you, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here with you today.
I was here 2 years ago for the first dialogue, and just a privilege to be here and talking to some of you again and some of you for the first time.
Once participants were given the opportunity to get to know each other on a personal basis, the setup moved to a much more intense, facilitated one-on-one dialogues.
What is the purpose of marriage? And the answer was the procreation and education of children, period. My church's teaching and my acceptance of those teachings and my adherence to those teachings would limit my definition of marriage to between a man and a woman.
We cannot ignore the history of relationships as we see through the Bible, and certainly in the Hebrew Bible, marriage is not between a man, it's not between two people. Marriage is very polygamous. There is almost no monogamous marriage in the Bible text, both Hebrew or Christian. We see symbols of other types of relationships in the Bible. That's certainly not about one man and one woman. The reason for marriage was to ensure that a woman was attached to a man, and it was about property rights.
We haven't been static on our understanding of marriage throughout Jewish tradition, that we've moved from this polygamous notion in the Bible and said that no longer works for us. Today we understand marriage as monogamous between two people, and if we've been able to make that adaptation to be able to respond to the needs of society, right? And Reformed Jewish tradition is about acknowledging the historical setting in which we're in. Then today there's also a new imperative that that there are people who love other people of the same gender, and that's a spiritual and a holy thing that deserves the recognition of our faith community.
The answer for me is marriage is between a man and a woman.
Our denomination believes that marriage is between one man and one woman.
Right. Okay.
And that goes back to the creation of God's creation of the earth.
Church itself believes that marriage is between a man and a woman. That as an AME pastor, I cannot marry someone. I cannot perform same-sex marriages.
When marriage was determined legal here in California, in that window of opportunity for 18,000 couples to, finally tie the knot, some of those couples who've been together 50 years. I remember one couple in particular who were interracial, had been together 55 years. Not only had they gone through the 60s, but they'd gone through the interracial period in the 40s and 50s, survived all of that, and came to me for their wedding. And then I remember the first day, I did 130 weddings, I think, in those 3 months. It was a busy time. But I remember couple after couple after couple, and just the emotion. I mean, it was, and I've done plenty of opposite gender marriages, and they were identical in their feelings, in what that meant for them, the recognition of the community, the celebration of their relationship. Everything that I saw happen with my straight friends was now happening for my same-gender loving couples.
The day that Prop 8 passed, I was a student at Hebrew Union College, the Reformed Seminary, and there was just this feeling of sadness and like a heft or a weight in the community that day. And part of it was because we have a number of LGBT students who attend the school, some of whom were married, and we're really devastated about what that meant for their marriage. So to watch a woman cry about the fact that she had finally gotten recognition for this relationship that meant so much to her by the broader community, and then to have that pulled away from her, that was hard. That was really hard.
We were pictured as being hate mongers, and we just felt that people labeled us and didn't know us. We had our temple surrounded, and there were talks of violence and that. Many of our chapels throughout Southern California and other areas were, people came into our buildings while we were worshiping and just stood there. They didn't really attack, but they intimidated people as they tried to get in their cars. They made children afraid and cry because of the things they were yelling and saying to them. We were harassed in many ways. People lost their jobs. And it was all credited to the Mormon community when this was a coalition and the Mormons were not the majority of the participants. And so this was a confusing, painful time for us. But the most painful part was the loss of relationships and friendships that we had.
It was a very difficult time. I think both opponents and proponents of Proposition 8 handled that very poorly. I remember the very acrimonious attitudes people, many, not everyone, but many people had. I remember hate-filled phone calls that I received from people who disagreed with the Catholic position. I remember someone coming to my own little congregation and plastering our church with vote no on Proposition 8 signs, which is certainly not something that we were advocating. I remember people in my own congregation asking questions about this. I remember the day after, the Sunday after the election, I was holding an ecumenical event at our cathedral here, where I had been able to bring together two Christian groups that don't normally interact together, and we were having this wonderful prayer service inside the cathedral, celebrating that coming together. And there were hundreds of people outside exercising their civil right to do so, calling us all types of names, all types of signs, all that type of thing. Totally oblivious to what I was trying to do inside, bringing people together. The irony was quite something there.
I believe that we listen to God, and I know that the answers can come differently to different people, and that we can't judge, and we can't put somebody down for having a different answer than we do.
And I know you don't want to judge, but when you, not you personally, but when you went to the ballot and you voted yes on Prop 8, you judged.
There was tension in the community because people assumed, as a Christian pastor, and especially as a Seventh-day Adventist, that I would be supportive of Prop 8. And so I had some explaining to do, but most of the explaining that I had to do, frankly, came from my own denomination. And the hypocrisy of it, to me, was so blatant that I just felt like, if I lose my job for this, I will have done something good.
The church had made a statement, had put out our policy that as clergy we could not perform same-sex marriages. And again, and like some clergy left the church because they felt very strongly that the church itself should not have put out a statement, should not have made this mandate.
I was also disappointed by how the conversation was framed, and largely it being kind of this secular left civil rights perspective, and then the religious voices were the voices that represented pro-Prop 8 perspective. And here I was part of a community that by and large, it was an anti-Prop 8, motivated very much out of religious convictions, and that we weren't able to successfully frame the conversation in terms of there are progressive religious values that inform why we support same-sex marriages as well. So I think it was that combination really of a sadness of watching those personal stories, and also a frustration that we didn't do a better job of framing the conversation.
When it comes to Proposition 8, specifically in California, there's a separate issue about the appropriateness of that legislation,
Okay.
even if you do believe that marriage should be between a man and a woman. There was a segment of the church that said that the government should not legislate on the basis of a religious test alone to people's freedom to practice their lives in the way that they choose to.
Okay.
A group of us actually stood up to that, and we issued our own statement, a small group of us, and we started a little organization called Adventists Against Prop 8.
When we talk about from a religious perspective, we're talking about marriage from our religious convictions. When the civil courts talk about marriage, they have to, because of the separation of church and state, have to talk about marriage from a civil,
From a legal point of view.
civil legal right.
You certainly are approaching this from a civil right. There's also the aspect, and you alluded to this certainly, of religious liberty here. You quite welcomely said that you would never expect us to marry someone that would go against our religious convictions, and we would certainly appreciate that. The difficulty is, how is that to be guaranteed? I mean, we just saw that with health care here a couple of weeks ago, where the Catholics in particular had been assured that by supporting the healthcare initiatives, and we do support them, but the idea that all of our facilities would have to provide insurance that would cover things which are contrary to our belief. And what's to say further down the line, civilly, the government says anyone who is going to marry people in this country will have to marry people of the same sex. I like the fact that we were able to sit and have this conversation in a civil manner. I disliked some of the things that were said during that whole campaign, some of the accusations that both of us, both sides of, if you will, were hurling at each other. Why do you have to demean someone in order to make your point? Why do you have to belittle? Why do you have to put someone else down in order to build your side up? You don't do that.
No.
And had we to do that again, I probably would have been stronger in my opposition to such tactics. It didn't really play much of a role in that whole thing, but I could have used my voice to say, wait a minute here, we don't need to take this tactic. We have to be true to ourselves. They are trying to be true to themselves. What else can we ask?
The 2 years ago when we had this initial conversation, the thing I've learned over this last 2 years has been very profound in the way that, you know, not only do we do, in my way, interreligious work, but the way that we actually just have relationship with people.
That's key.
You know,
Absolutely.
you know, because most of us go into a conversation wanting to win.
Yeah.
And when you when you come to the dawning that you don't need to win, there's nothing to win.
Yeah.
And when you and I rub shoulders with one another, we realize that we have so much more in common that we could actually work together on.
Absolutely.
That would change the face of this world.
Absolutely. The opportunity for us is to realize that and to work to set aside certain dogmatic differences, as you pointed out, and to work together for the common good. Think of what a marvelous effect it would have on the city of Los Angeles alone. So I would ask your forgiveness if I've offended you in any way this last year or on this whole issue.
Well, thankfully you haven't. But you know, I think that we've been honest to one another. We've been respectful of one another.
Yes.
And I know from our side, my side personal, you know, there were some moments, you know, in that whole debate where, you know, where it was hard to keep peace. And so that forgiveness is mutual, and I offer and extend and ask the same in return.
The Way of Openness can be applied to conversations on any topic. It addresses both the personal desire to live with unique integrity and the social need to cooperate and thrive in groups.
It is critical that the premise of the dialogue is not to force people to change their convictions and core beliefs. Rather, it is to create the safe space for all to engage as persuasively and openly as they can in a civil and respectful way. Only then can we have a productive public conversation that can contribute to a flourishing, multi-religious society?
We hope that the impact of these dialogues will be to elevate the level of discussion in our society, so we can get to the point where, even though we have serious disagreements that we may never resolve, we'll still be able to discuss them in an atmosphere of trust and remain loyal friends.